I'm fighting an uphill battle tonight. There's a very widespread prejudice that when you're interpreting a text, there are no rules. It's really a matter of free play. Anybody can say anything that he wants. What does the text mean to you? This was even dignified by titles in academia, postmodernism or deconstructionism. And if you are a culture, a religion, a thought system that bases itself on documents are very important, it calls into question the entire foundation of your life system. It even has its own tone of voice. It's a matter of interpretation. Meaning, anybody can say whatever he wants. Now, this is utterly unserious. This is utterly unserious. To speak like that, you have to take leave of your senses. Let's just remind ourselves of some very simple facts about everyday living. There are contracts. Businesses sign contracts. If texts don't mean anything inherently, if texts can be interpreted any way you want, how can you ever know what the other side is going to do when they sign the contract? How can you ever test if later the contract says that Peter has to deliver to Paul $15,000 on the 15th of each month? Every 15th of the month, he shows up in Paul's office with a box full of $15,000. June 15th, he comes in with a box, and Paul opens it up, and by golly, there are 15,000 Monopoly dollars in the box. So Paul says, where's the money? Peter says, there's the money. Paul says, come on, that's not dollars. He says, sure it is. It's Monopoly dollars. So he says, come on, in the contract it says US dollars. He says, look at the side of the back. It says, made in the United States of America. It's US Monopoly dollars. Could that happen? Would there be a problem in court? He interprets it to mean currency, and he interprets it to mean monopoly. So it's just interpretations, and each one has his own interpretation. Would anybody be seriously dislodged by this? Anybody worry about how the contract would be decided in court? I hope not. Someone is sued for libel. He says George was caught breaking and entering the diamond shop and stealing the stuff. George says, I'm suing you for libel. And he proves that he wasn't there. And the guy says, oh, you have to understand, the diamond shop just means you were doing crossword puzzles. And breaking and entering means that you put $1 in the machine to get a Coke. And because that's what breaking and entering means to me. That's what diamond shop means to me. Maybe it means something different to you, but that's what it means to me. Will he get off for libel? Will he be able to protect himself for libel? I didn't really say that you were breaking and entering. No, breaking and entering means putting the money in the machine to get a soda. It's not going to make it. Dear George, you've done something that has very much disappointed with me, and I never want to see you again. He goes to his friend and he says, what am I going to do? It's the end. She'll never talk to me again. No, you don't understand. I never means I was at the supermarket. And want means I was running short of soap suds. And see you means I need a new picture because the old picture is something that's boring to me. Just interpret it, and you won't have any problem. You think interpreting it that way will help with the relationship and save the relationship? Even just interpret it differently. Because the text doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's just how you interpret it. I just think that's obviously nonsense. Even though philosophical system, I want you to know, one of the people who pushed this at Yale, the whole lecture department was infected with this disease at Yale. About 25 years ago, one of the people pushing it turned out to have a Nazi past, which was verified through documents. And he's the one who's pushing the idea that documents don't mean anything. Could there be a coincidence there? If documents don't mean anything, you can't convict me of a Nazi past on the basis of the documents. Now you'll say, okay, but look, aren't there controversies over interpretation? Even long-standing controversies? Controversies that we aren't able to resolve? Doesn't that show that it doesn't have any objective rules? It doesn't have any facts? It really is just a matter of how you choose to do it, what your opinion is? No, it doesn't show that. Because every field of human endeavor has unresolved problems. Problems about which there's controversy. In cosmology, there's string theory. Some people think string theory is the hottest thing and it's going to be the future. And others say, at least Molden wrote a book called Not Even Science. Because any theory that can't be tested isn't science. So one group says it's the promise of the future. The other group says that means there's no right or wrong about physics. Physics is just whatever you happen to say. Cosmology is what rolls off your tongue. And nobody... Right? Is that right? Doesn't sound right. There are controversies in chemistry. There are controversies in biology. Any number of controversies in biology. The United States has as its foundational document a constitution. Are there controversies about what the Constitution means? Sure. Does that mean it doesn't mean anything? Why would you jump to that conclusion? From the fact that there are some difficult spots, it follows that there's no verified information at all? Why would you say that? It certainly doesn't follow. So, the idea that there is controversy doesn't establish that there's nothing that's right or wrong. Furthermore, especially in the case of textual interpretation, let's say you have a text for which there are three recognized competing is prejudicial, three recognized interpretations. There may be 100 suggested interpretations which everyone agrees are wrong. The fact that there are three and there's no decision which one is right doesn't mean there's no agreement, because there are many other suggested interpretations which everyone agrees are wrong. That's also agreement. Then, I corrected myself a moment ago, if you have three interpretations, it's not obvious that they're competing. It's not obvious that they're competing. Can I assume you've heard of Shakespeare? The greatest writer in the English language? Okay, in addition to writing plays, he wrote sonnets, which are a type of poetry. You read the sonnet, you look up what the scholars say, and they say, well, there are two ways that we can interpret this poem, and it accounts for all the words and the order, the choice of vocabulary, one way and another way. Must one ask, well, which one did he have in mind? Which one is right? Isn't there another possible approach? What would the other approach be?
They're both right.
He had them both in mind. He planned both of them. He wanted the alert and sensitive reader to pick up both of them, and then he wanted to say something by juxtaposing the two interpretations. With a genius like Shakespeare, who was the greatest writer in the English language, I think many people would be drawn to the latter opinion. There are two interpretations which fully fit all of the poem. Then he had both in mind, and he wanted the reader to see both of them and to work with both of them. Well, I have a radical suggestion that the creator of the universe is not less than Shakespeare. So maybe, if there are several interpretations, the creator of the universe intended all of them. And they're not competing interpretations. And they're all right. There'll be a special problem when the interpreters disagree and one says the other one's wrong. That will mean, under those conditions, there really is a controversy. But not every case of multiple interpretations. When you have in the Midrash multiple interpretations, almost never does one speaker in the Midrash say, he's wrong and this is the right. Each one just says his interpretation. There's no reason to think in those cases that they can't all be correct. Now, I want to give you some examples, having stated what I think are the general rules here. I want to give you some examples of interpretations which I think can be nailed down, or cases where there are multiples, but you can see why there are multiples, and you can see that it's built into the text, so that this won't only be abstract. These are little things, and they're not meant to teach any great lessons. There's a question of getting a hold of what the text means. This is in Take a look on page 145. This is Jacob's dream. I want the first fragment, which, as I say, is, in terms of philosophical matters, may be neutral. Verse 12. And he dreamt, and behold, a ladder was set earthward, and its top reached heavenward. That is a good, accurate translation. Now let's go through this piece by piece. Suppose I suggest to you that if it says that ladder was set earthward, that means it was let down from heaven. The ladder was set earthward means it was let down from heaven. You see anything in the fragment that I just read which might trouble you?
Yeah.
What's that?
I mean, how can it reach heavenwards if the top is going towards earth?
Okay, we're not saying the top is going towards earth, but how about heavenward? Doesn't heavenward mean towards heaven? So if you tell me earthward means towards earth coming from heaven, so heavenward ought to mean towards heaven coming from earth. And it looks like a contradiction. And if it's a contradiction, you certainly can't get any clear description out of it. But that's wrong. That's wrong. Look carefully at the two phrases. Look at the differences between the two phrases, and you should be able to figure out why there's no contradiction here at all.
The word set.
As opposed to, look at it on the page, take your time, read it on the page. Set as opposed to, no, as opposed to,
Extend. Or no?
what word do you have on the page? Don't guess, don't make it up. You have the right idea, but we're in the text now. Set as opposed to,
Reached.
reached. They're not the same verbs. They're not the same verbs. And what about the subject of each phrase? In the first phrase, the subject is the ladder. Second phrase, the subject is its top. The first phrase is the ladder was set earthward. Second phrase was the top reached heavenward. So they aren't obviously in contradiction to one another. The first talks about the ladder, second talks about the top. The first talks about being set, second talks about reaching. Now here's the consistent way to read it. The first phrase tells you how it got put into position. It got put into position by coming down from heaven. The second phrase tells you, okay, now that it's come down from heaven, how big is it? Somebody comes to a road and this road sign is down. And he says, does this road go to Tel Aviv? You can say that in English, right? You don't mean the road is moving to Tel Aviv, rolling along at 16 miles an hour? You mean how far does the tar go? Where's the end of the tar? Does it end in Tel Aviv or earlier than that? That's all you mean. The first phrase tells you how the ladder got into position. The second phrase tells you, in position, how far does it go? Could be that the ladder's whole length is half the distance from heaven to earth, comes down from heaven, lands on the earth, and extends up halfway to heaven. That could be. So no, it comes down from heaven and reaches the earth. But as a matter of fact, once it's set up on the earth, it reaches all the way to heaven. There's no inconsistency here at all. Now I claim you can't budge from that. You can't interpret it as talking about mice, or about football games, or about wooden ladders as opposed to metal ladders, or talking about whether the ladder has arms, or whether it's only up on Rosh Chodesh. The text says what it says. It says what it says in very precise fashion. All the words fit. You could add meanings to it. You could add ideas to it. But this is rock solid. There's absolutely nothing to say here. Okay? You cannot fight with that interpretation. I must tell you, I thought of this myself, but I was very happy to find out that Sham Shmuel Hirsch says exactly the same thing. So it's not only my speculation. Now, on the same page, the top of the page, Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He encountered the place and spent the night there. In the Hebrew, the words are Vayifga b'makom. Rashi says two things. One is that Lifgoa can mean to arrive at. It can mean that. And the other thing is that lifgoa can mean to entreat, to plead with someone, to beg for something. So Rashi brings both pshatim. Now, suppose I say this. Look, we're talking about a story about someone traveling. He travels, comes to a place, goes to sleep, has a dream, gets up in the morning, keeps traveling. Why would you even dream of sticking in an interpretation of entreating, pleading, begging for something? Why would you do that? Obviously, in context, it's talking about arriving at a place. And the word lifgoa does mean to arrive at a place. What would motivate you to say that there was also a meaning of pleading with, entreating, begging for something? The answer is obvious. The Torah used an ambiguous word. Why did it use a word with two meanings? There's a word in Hebrew to arrive at a place. It's lahagia. Lahagia would mean that he arrived. No, the Torah didn't use a word with one meaning. It used a word with two meanings. Why would it do that? Doesn't that mean that it means to tell you that it wants both meanings on board? So here now you have two meanings. They're not competing at all. The use of an ambiguous word indicates that both meanings are directly implied by the text. They're stated in the text. Are you together with me? Okay. Now, take a look at verse 13. Behold, Hashem was standing over him, and he said, I am Hashem, God of Abraham, your father, and God of Isaac. Stop there. Anybody want to ring the alarm bell? Who's he talking to?
Jacob.
Jacob. No, I am the God of Abraham, your father, and God of Isaac. Who is Jacob's father? Isaac. So isn't it a little funny for God to identify himself as God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac without father? Now let's not exaggerate this. The word father in Hebrew can mean father, grandfather, great-grandfather to the nth power. The word son can mean son, grandson, great-grandson to the nth power. These are expandable terms. We are called B'nai Yisrael. Israel is Jacob's other name. And we, 30 generations later, are called B'nai, which means B'nai, 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 B'nai. Okay, so it's not shocking to call Abraham Jacob's father. But to call Abraham Jacob's father and not Isaac within the same breath, that needs some kind of explanation. Now, there are two approaches. One approach is to interpret it here, as the Baal HaTurim does, and to give it a meaning here on the page. There's another approach, which is to look for parallels and try to say something that will make them all work together. As a matter of fact, this phrase here has two other parallels in Jacob's life relating him to God. And there is a way to make it all work. Take a look on page 173. Here Jacob's coming home from being separated from his father for 20 years. And he hears that his brother Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men who are going to wipe him out. So in verse 10, he prays to God. Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac. Oh ho, so here, father's applied to both. So if back on 145 you want to spin a theory, Jacob can't be called, Isaac can't be called Jacob's father because he's too close, because he's too young, because whatever, won't work. Because here in 173, Isaac is called father, together with Abraham being called father. And then, you can keep your fingers in here, you have enough fingers. On page 257, this is Jacob coming down to Egypt. Chapter 46. So Israel, that's Jacob, set out with all that he had. He came to Beersheba where he was ordered to sacrifice to the God of his father Isaac. And Abraham left out entirely. And so, this cries out for some kind of treatment. And don't tell me it was different scribes at different times, living in different locales, and the editor later put it together. That's utter nonsense.
Maybe Isaac grew as a person.
Maybe.
First he's just
But
one, then he grows.
I would like something which is not... Okay,
The If that's
before I tell you what I think is right, there are two levels of interpretation, two criteria for interpretation. One is, I say something which is consistent with the text. Nothing in the text says I'm wrong. The other is that I say something for which there is positive evidence in the text. I have to support what I say with positive evidence, not just that it fits the passages I'm trying to interpret. Shakespeare wrote a play called Macbeth. Suppose I suggest that Macbeth was a transvestite, a woman dressed up as a man. Where does it say in the play he wasn't a transvestite? Doesn't say. Doesn't say. Maybe he was an extraterrestrial. Maybe he was a miraculous frog that turned into a person. Nothing in the words that Shakespeare wrote imply that that's not correct. But that's play. That's frivolous play. If you want to interpret a text, you have to show that there's positive evidence in the text that this is right, not just merely consistent. By the way, the principles that I'm using are principles straight out of science. If you have a set of phenomena that you want to explain, thinking of an explanation that's merely consistent with them will not be good enough. In particular, you want to do another experiment to see whether it tests true, and you'll want to be able to explain what you see. There's infinity of possibilities that are consistent with this finite material that you have, and there are principles for weaning them out. Being consistent isn't enough. Now, I want you to take a look on page 23. Towards the middle of the page, verse 20. Ada bor Yaval. He was the first of those who dwell in tents and breed cattle. The name of his brother was Yuval. He was the first of all to handle the harp and the flute, meaning they invented this sort of activity. Everybody who came after them was following their footsteps. The word in the Hebrew for both firsts is Av, father. When it says that Yaval was the Av of all those who dwell in tents, breed cattle, it does not mean that shepherding was done only by Yaval's biological descendants. When it says that Yuval was the first, the Av of all those who played the lyre and the what do they call it? The harp and the flute, doesn't mean all musicians were the biological descendants of Yuval. It means they invented this form of activity and everybody else took it from them. So Av in Hebrew in the book of Genesis, the book that we are interpreting, right? Av in the Hebrew of the book of Genesis can mean role model, paradigm, originator. Now let's see if that meaning helps in the three passages of Jacob that we're dealing with, whether it might fit. What I'm telling you now is a Kedushas Levi, one of the early Hasidic masters. Page 145, what's going on? Jacob is leaving the land of Israel. He's going to spend, in the end, 20 years outside the land of Israel. Hashem is identifying himself to Jacob. Who am I? I'm the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. But for the next 20 years of your life, Isaac can't be considered your father because Isaac was born, lived, and died in the land of Israel and never left. He never set foot outside the land of Israel. So if you want to look back to a paradigm who you could look to as a model of what you should do, how you should conduct yourself outside the land of Israel, only Abraham counts. Isaac can't count. So that's why God associates Av with Abraham and not with Isaac. On 173, he's coming back to the land of Israel. And he's about to have a very difficult and perhaps dangerous and unpleasant interaction with his older brother. Both Abraham and Isaac lived in the land of Israel, and both of them had difficulties with their older brothers. So, Jacob says to God, God of my father Abraham, my father Isaac, they're both fathers to me now. They're both fathers to me. They're both guides to me now. That's why he calls them both Av. On page 257, this is much later. Abraham and Isaac are both dead. Jacob is going down to Egypt because there's a famine in the land of Israel. And he's discovered that Joseph, his son, is the viceroy in Egypt. Now, Jacob thinks, I want to go down to Egypt because of a famine. What do my guides say? What do my mentors say? What did my paradigm say? Well, Abraham, when he had a famine, went down to Egypt. That's what he did. So Abraham is gold. He did what I want to do. But Isaac, there was a famine in Isaac's years also. This is explicitly in the verses. There was a famine in Isaac's years also. And he wanted to go down to Egypt, and God told him, no, you can't go down to Egypt. Now, since Jacob wants to go down to Egypt, what's bothering him? What's bothering him is what God told his father Isaac. What God told his father Abraham is gold. And if Isaac had also go down to Egypt, he wouldn't have had any worries. But God told his father Isaac not to go. So he offers sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Tell me, what should I do? How do I know that's right? Because look at the next verses. God spoke to Israel in the night vision and said, Jacob, Jacob. He said, here I am. And he said, capital H, I am the God of your father. Which father? The only father in the context, Isaac. Have no fear of descending to Egypt. So if God says to him, have no fear of descending to Egypt, we know what he was afraid of. He was afraid of going down to Egypt. Why is he afraid? Because God told his father Isaac not to go, and maybe he hasn't got permission to go. He says, I'm the God of your father. I'm telling you, yes, you should go. I don't think you can budge from that. You have three different places. You have a verse in Genesis itself that tells you Av Kamin paradigm, role model, and it fits into the three of them like hand in glove. You certainly can't deny that that is an acceptable interpretation. I would even say a true interpretation. Might there be other interpretations as well? No one would say that if you have a true interpretation, there couldn't be others. But you can't have a contradictory interpretation. That you can't have. Something that says this is wrong. This is too tightly, it fits too tightly into the text. Are we together? Okay, now I want to show you where you can have a single text that has two very widely differing interpretations, and where they might both be true, but they're really totally unrelated to one another. Back to 145. The second half of verse 12. He saw this ladder, and by the way, I should just remark, the interpretation of the first half, where we say the ladder was put into position by coming down from heaven to earth. I'm going to just give you just a little bit of background here. I want you to read 12 through 15 and tell me which word seems to be very superfluous. Occurs a number of times, and maybe we could tolerate it once, but all the rest of the time we could erase it and we wouldn't lose any content at all.
I'm going to go with I will.
Behold.
How many times does behold occur in these passages? This passage?
3.
Read again. They didn't teach you to read in university. How many times did it appear? Everybody's convinced it's 3?
4.
4 times. Twice in 12, once at the beginning of 13, and once at the beginning of 15. Right? 4 times. Now, behold means pay attention. Pay attention! Okay, I'm paying attention. You have to write it 4 times in the space of 3 verses, or 4 verses. That just seems like overkill, right? At the very least, each phrase that gets its own behold has to contribute something of meaningfulness by itself. It can't just be backdrop for the rest. So if the first half of 12 gets a behold, the first half of 12 has to teach me something. In other words, if the whole thing stopped there and he woke up, he would have learned something. He would have learned something. What would he have learned? The ladder between heaven and earth gets set up from heaven to earth. That means connections between God and man are established by God. It's not man's responsibility to climb to heaven. God will reach out to him from heaven to earth. Unlike Lahavdil El Havdalah Spain, Torah Latome, I think it's one of the great mosaics that was made in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, whether it was in Sistine Chapel or other places, which has God reaching his hand out down and man reaching his hand up and meeting in the middle? No. That's not the biblical picture, at least not for our Bible. Maybe it's part of the Christian Bible. And it's certainly not the right interpretation of these verses. The ladder is set from heaven to earth, coming down from heaven to earth. That's important to know. That's important to know. Okay, now, the next phrase is, behold, agents of God were ascending and descending on it. The word angels is okay, but it's redundant. You don't have to say angels of God. Angels have only one location, and that's working for God. And the word malach in Hebrew, anybody here know some Hebrew? Malach is related to malacha. Malacha is activity, it's action. A malach is an agent, not a messenger. That's terribly wrong. Lots of malachim don't carry messages. They do other things. The agent, something that operates on God's behalf somehow, whatever that means. Agents of God were ascending and descending on it. Now, just a piece of logic based on your own general knowledge. Anything disturb you about this? Ascending and descending. Angels. Agents of God.
Whether it's something first.
Yeah, it's a round trip. Sounds like a round trip. Where's the home base of the angels? Presumably in heaven. They aren't living in Ohio. And that being the case, a round trip ought to be descending and ascending. What to do? Now, to introduce the next interpretation, I want to make another distinction. Some interpretations are deduced. The first half is deduced. You cannot budge from it. Other interpretations explain. If I add in some extra information, I can explain what's going on here. Of course, I'm adding in extra information. That certainly leaves room for other interpretations, maybe even competing interpretations, because I don't have a deduction, I have only an explanation. Still, one shouldn't be too dismissive of explanations, since in science all you ever get is explanations. Never do you get deductions, and that's why always a scientific theory could be replaced by another scientific theory. It's not as solid as a deduction, but it certainly is valid. Here's the traditional interpretation. Maimonides has another one. That's why I say that others are possible. But the traditional interpretation is this. Great people, like the patriarchs, had a permanent group of angels assigned to them. The angels somehow express God's presence and God's care. They have a group of angels assigned to them. I told you what's happening here is Jacob's leaving the land of Israel. So he has a vision of what difference it makes. What difference does it make whether you're inside the land of Israel or outside the land of Israel? Answer, it makes a big difference because the angels who are accompanying you inside are going to leave you. And they're going to be replaced by a different group. He sees his angels leaving by ascending, and he sees the replacements coming down. That's why it's ascending first and descending afterwards. To put it in modern terms, once you cross the border of the United States, you're no longer protected by the FBI, you're protected by the CIA. Right? Now, you say, but look, you just added in a whole piece of information which isn't in the text, not even hinted in the text. That's true. That's true. But let's see if we can't develop for it some support. This is what I said before, not just being consistent, but some support. Look at page 169. This is Jacob coming back to the land of Israel. 32, chapter 32. Verse 2. Jacob went on his way, and agents of God encountered him. Jacob said when he saw them, "This is a godly camp." So he called the name of that place Machanoim. Now your translator here had mercy on you and used the Hebrew word and didn't translate it. Because Machanaim in Hebrew means twin camps. Twin camps. Kali, boys and girls, it says, when he saw them, this is a godly camp. So he called the place twin camps. That's not obvious. If you see one camp, why would you call the place twin camps? Answer, because he had one camp with him. He had one camp with him. And now this is a second camp. He had the camp of the CIA angels, the externals, and this is the FBI's coming to greet him. And for a short period of time, there's an overlap. So when he sees this camp of angels, he now is in the presence of two, and he calls the place twin camps. So that fits. Now, I'll tell you what the Rabbi said. If you put the two of them together, you see that the higher angels always move first. On 145, with ascending and descending, it's the Israeli angels who are leaving him and the externals that are coming to replace them. Here he's coming back. The Israeli angels come to greet him while the externals are still with him. So, on 169, there's an overlap. While the externals are still with him, the Israeli angels appear, and for some time, there are two camps in front of him. Okay, if you always have the higher ones moving first, and when it's coming back, the result is an overlap, then at 145, what does it have to be? A gap, right? What does it say on 145? What does it say? The second after 12 is, angels of God were ascending and ascending on it, and behold, Hashem was standing over him. Why was that, do you think? Because there's a gap in the angels. The Israeli angels are leaving. The externals haven't come to replace them. He has no angelic accompaniment, so God himself stands over him. I think things work out pretty well, right? You have a lot of information, and all of it fits this pattern that we're talking about, higher and lower angels and angels that are assigned to him. Still, Chazal are using something which isn't written in the text. That leaves room for an alternative interpretation. Maimonides says that the ladder is the ladder of prophecy, and going higher on the ladder means having more profound prophecy, more intense, more revealing prophecy, and prophets go up and down. They don't remain on one place. A single prophet can have many different kinds of prophecy, different times in his life. So it's a model for something else. Neither one contradicts the other. Neither one contradicts the other. They're both acceptable interpretations. Are we together? Okay, now, there are different types of interpretation. Now I'm going to teach you something that's really, I think, pretty subtle and quite profound. Interpreting a text. What are the rules? How do you know how to interpret a text? I'll give you an example. There are history books. History books are supposed to tell you what happened. If you have letters or newspaper reports or statues which are inconsistent with what the history book says, then the history book is wrong. We're supposed to tell you what happened. These things didn't happen. Suppose someone reads a play by Shakespeare, Antony and Cleopatra, about Roman times, and he complains. Those things never happened. Antony never saw those words. Cleopatra never saw those words. They weren't in that place at that time. What kind of bum is this author? He's writing about things that never happened. That's no history. What will we answer him? Excuse me, Shakespeare's not writing history. He's writing literature. Sure, the things never happened. Shakespeare's trying to teach you about human nature, human character, human emotions, political intrigue. He's trying to teach you about Roman history. It's a different sort of book. Only if you know what the author intends to do and what the cultural audience is going to hear with the text do you know how to interpret it. Okay, ideally, the author should tell you what he means by the text. God is the author. He has to tell us what he means for us to do with the text. The point of the text is to communicate. The question is how. The truth is, the text communicates on many different levels simultaneously. And each level has its own method. And the methods were handed down at Sinai so that people would be able to receive the communication of the text. Some of you may have heard of the acronym PARDES, Pshat, Remes, Drush, and Sod. Those are 4 different patterns of interpretation. And then there are others as well. And maybe at this point, the word interpretation might be misleading. So let me replace it by different ways in which the text communicates. You could have a communication which says, read the first letter of each word. That's how spies communicated in wartime. They coded meanings into the text, sometimes by read the first letter of the first word, and the second letter of the second word, and the third letter of the third word, and then reverse it, and then go to the 4th, 5th, and 6th, and 5th, 6th, and 4th, and codes like that. And what it says on the surface is meaningless. or numerical values for the words, or other things. The author of the text has to tell you what he intends you to do with the text. Why am I saying this? Because there are people who are convinced that the text really means what it says. By that they mean the meaning of the text is the literal reading of the words and the syntax, the grammar, comparative text. That's what it says. All the rest is fluff. All the rest is just made up. All the rest is subjective. All the rest is just play. The title of tonight's lecture is Interpretation Play. But that's a mistake. All the different methods of reading the communication of the text are valid because the author of the text told us that they are all available. Indeed, it might have turned out that the literal meaning of the text is irrelevant. It might have turned out that it's irrelevant. Just like in Shakespeare. He said this to him. He went there. He killed him. None of that happened. So what? It's not meant to tell you what happened. It could have been that way. No, it's not true. God gave us a list of ways that the text communicates. One of them is the literal meaning of the text, but it's no more important, no more solid, no more valid, no more truthful than any of the other ways of interpreting or communicating. Yeah.
What does the Gemara mean when it says
It means every verse has a pshat. That's what it means. It has a pshat. Not that it means you can't say the verse lost its pshat. That doesn't exclude other ways of interpreting it or other communications. It just means you can't ever deny the pshat of the pasuk. But it has other meanings as well. And the Gemara has 3 examples where it doesn't have a pshat. The same Gemara. Because all universal statements in the rabbinic corpus have exceptions. All of them. They all have exceptions. They're meant to have exceptions. This is codified in a statement that Rabbi Yochanan said, Ein lamedim min haklolos. You don't learn from general statements. And he went on to say, Ein lamedim min haklolos, afilu b'makom shenamar b'chutz. If you have a statement, all A's are B's except for X, Y, Z, and you say, well, the rabbis told us the exceptions. They told us X, Y, Z are the exceptions. You don't learn from that either. There could be other exceptions also they didn't mention. No universal statement is binding as universal. There is no such thing.
Isn't that a universal
No,
statement?
because I said rabbinic statements. I'm a logician. My statement is not a rabbinic statement. I meant a statement of the rabbis of the Talmud. Right? What I'm saying is not in the Talmud. Good try. Okay, so now let's go back to the very beginning of the Torah. Page 3. The first 2 words of the Torah contain a grammatical contradiction. The first 2 words are be, reshis, bara. What does reshis mean in Hebrew?
First.
Nope.
Beginning?
Nope.
First.
Say again?
First.
Nope.
Like multiple firsts.
Nope.
No ratio.
Okay, I'm playing a trick on you. I'll give you a hint. Reshit HaSefer means the beginning of the book. What does Reshit mean?
Beginning of?
Say again?
Beginning of?
Correct, beginning of. Reshit HaSefer. HaSefer is the book. Reshit HaSefer is the beginning of the book. So Reshit means beginning of. After beginning of, what sort of word or phrase has to come? A noun. The name of a thing. Beginning of the century, beginning of the novel, beginning of the symphony, beginning of the quartet, beginning of the solo,
creation.
music. What?
Beginning of the creation.
Yes, could be. But it has to have a noun. But the next word in Hebrew, bara, is a verb. It's not a noun, it's a verb. Literally, it is beginning of created. Can't say that in English, and you can't say it in Hebrew. It's just wrong.
That's what Rashi means.
And that's what Rashi, the second Rashi, is exercised by. That's a long and complex and beautiful Rashi. Anyway, it describes this whole methodology. I'm not going to go through it. So Rashi says it means beginning of creating. Read Reshis bara, beginning of creating. Not created, but creating. You'll say, but look, it doesn't say creating. It says created. And don't give me this changing the text. That belongs, on the hill over there with the phony academics. But we know the text is holy, and the text says what it says. So Rashi says, I'll prove it to you, or at least I'll give you support for it. The second verse of the book of Hosea says, Tchilas diber Hashem b'Hosea. Tchilas means beginning of. Just like Reshis, the tough at the end makes it into the of. Tchilas means beginning of, and diber means he spoke. As this is the beginning of the book, obviously means beginning of God speaking. It's an idiom. It's an idiom in Hebrew when you have a smichus together with a verb. The communication is that it's a gerund, verbal noun. Creating is a noun, right? Not a verb. How do you test whether something's a noun? Try to make it the subject of a sentence. Creating is fun. Creating is hard work. Creating pays well. Creating is no problem, right? Creating is a noun. It's a noun built out of a verb. That's what a gerund is, but it's a noun. So Rashi says, I tell you to read it as beginning of creating. Rashi invents a critic because his mode of interpretation is based on logic, and therefore there can be critics. And the critic says, Rashi, there are many elliptical verses that leave out words in the Tanakh. Lots and lots and lots of them. And the text expects the alert reader to fill them in. And there's one in the book of Isaiah which has this very word. The verse says, Magid mereshis acharis, which literally translated would be, he declares from the beginning of, the end of. What was that again? He declares from the beginning of, the end of. Beginning of what? End of what? It's talking about God. It's left out. Says the critic, obviously you're supposed to fill in everything. God declares from the beginning of everything, the end of everything. You're supposed to fill in the noun. Well, says the critic, I say fill it in here too. Fill it in here too. Don't change bara into baro. Don't change created into creating. Just put in the beginning of everything God created the heavens and the earth. That works. Grammatically, that works fine. Says Rashi, you're right. Does work fine. And it has a payoff of expressing a fundamental principle of Jewish religion, theology, in the first sentence of the Torah, that God created everything from the beginning. But Rashi says it's wrong. It's wrong. Because in the next verse, the Torah mentions the water. Where did the water come from? Where did the water come from? If you're going to read in the beginning of everything God created, the heavens and the earth, you have no origin for the water. And if you answer, which I think frankly is Maimonides' answer, but if you answer, but earth could mean the globe, including the water, Rashi will tell you that 5 verses hence, the Torah says, Eretz means Yabasha, dry land. God called the Yabasha Eretz. So in this passage, Eretz means dry land. So in this passage, there's no account of the creation of water. So that being the case, Rashi says, interpret it my way, put in creating. Now look at the English, which follows Rashi in this case. In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, that's mid-process. That's the beginning of everything. Lots of things went on before that, like the creation of water and the deep and other things. But when God got around, so to speak, to creating heavens and earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, darkness was the spheres of the deep, divine presence was having the waters, that's just stage setting. God said, let there be light. And there was light. That was the first process in creating heavens and earth. The whole story picks up mid-process. You don't go back to the beginning. And if you lose an expression of this fundamental point of the Jewish religion, so what? We're not in doubt about that. It says so in the prophets. It says so in the oral tradition. A principle doesn't have to be everywhere. And Rashi says it's not here. Okay, the Rambam reads it the other way. Now, there's another communication in the verse, which Rashi mentions, from the rabbis. They say the word reshis is a code word for the Jewish people and for the Torah, which it is in a verse in Jeremiah and a verse in Proverbs. Be can mean for the sake of, even in literal Hebrew. Literal Hebrew in the book of Genesis. Be can mean for the sake of, I'll serve you for 7 years for the sake of Rachel, your younger daughter. For the sake of there is base. And the midrashic interpretation or communication is for the sake of the Jewish people and the Torah, God created the heavens and the earth. And if a person protests, but look, that's not what Rashis means. Rashis doesn't mean the Torah. Rashis doesn't mean the Jewish people. So what if there's a verse in Jeremiah and a verse in Proverbs which use the same word for the Torah and the Jewish people? So what? That's clearly not what the verse means. We will tell that person to go back to first grade. We're not discussing what the verse means. We're discussing what the verse is communicating. What is God communicating to us through this verse? And the answer is he's communicating through the literal meaning of the verse, and he's communicating through the midrashic sources on the verse, and he's communicating through the Kabbalistic sources on the verse. They are all genuine communications. I'll just mention to you the Kabbalistic interpretation, and then I'm going to quit. The base can mean in, like in time. The base can mean for the sake of. The base can also mean with. You use a tool to do something. Now, the Kabbalistic interpretation is this. The subject of the verse is unmentioned. That subject X used Rashis to create Elohim. Create God, sort of. That unnamed subject used Rashis to create Elohim. That's what it says in the introduction to the Zohar. What's the idea? The idea, as I've told some of you, is that we don't talk about God. God's beyond all talking about. We talk about his modes of action, how he interacts with the world. He interacts with the world on the basis of many different principles. Whenever you see a name of God, the first thing you ask in Kabbalistic terms is which principle is being mentioned. And here, the first verse tells you which which principle is doing the job of the creation and where it came from. What's its pedigree? And the verse says X used Y to create the principle that gave rise to our world. The principle that gave rise to our world is what's communicated by the name Elohim. Throughout the entire first chapter of Genesis, it's only Elohim. And the first verse tells you where Elohim came from. There's no competition here. The Pshat level tells you when it happened. The Midrash level tells you for what purpose it happened. And the Kabbalistic communication tells you who did it. They're all necessary to understand. They all help to complete a picture. They all work hand in hand. I hope that this short discussion convinces you that interpretation is not free play.